Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, Harold, I'm good. How are you?
It is February already.
It is.
What do you think?
It's quick. The months are flying by already in
It
2025.
is.
I always say it's 2024.
2025
2025.
is already in February. So I thought it would be a great time to talk about Black History Month because
Okay.
February is always celebrated recently here as Black History Month.
Yeah,
So
true.
what do you think about that? I mean,
Yeah.
do you know anything about the aspect or
No,
the reason why?
no, and no. So
You know.
growing up, right? Of course, we had we do have Black History Month, and we celebrate it, but I don't think it was as pronounced as it is or it was today. It is today. So yes, it was there, but there was never any. Oh, but this is why we do it, right?
Okay,
It was just, oh, okay, we know February is this month,
right.
and this is what we do. So no, I'm curious to hear all about that, and then kind of walk
I
through
would
it with you.
I would say down through the years, and it's interesting because when I was young, we loosely talked about Black History Month,
Yeah.
February, that kind of thing, but it was not really necessarily looked across the spectrum by most folks about Black history. Most Black people knew Black history was being celebrated in that month,
Yeah.
and so in that we began to see it become more and more prevalent as time went on. But it was actually started, and I was always curious, why do we have to spend just the month of February
Yeah.
for Black history? And I know a lot of folks out there probably kind of wondered that same thing. But it was started back originally in February, back in 1926. And it was, at that time, it was being Black History Week in the month of February. It was only like a week or so. But it was started by a guy by the name of Carter G. Woodson, who was a scholar.
Yeah.
And he felt like this was a great opportunity to sort of display some of the contributions that African Americans had created for the U.S. landscape and the economy, and and so those kinds of things right there was sort of the start of Black History
Gotcha.
Month.
Yeah, and I know Mr. Carter Woodson was very a prominent, very educated
Yes.
as well. And he actually founded the Association for the Study of African American Life and History as well, which that foundation now.
So you know a
pushes
little bit
that.
about.
A little, I mean, we did a little research on it, but yes, I mean,
Can you tell a little bit more about him? Because I know probably some folks don't even know about him.
Exactly. So Carter G. Woodson, he's a historian and journalist. Like I said, extremely educated. He had his MSBS from the University of Chicago, and then also a PhD from Harvard.
Yes.
Which was the second African American to receive that, to get his PhD from Harvard behind Webb Du Bois.
So now, in that, if you think about it, digging a little deeper into Carter G. Woodson, his background, his parents were slaves.
That's right.
Okay.
Right.
Did you know anything about that? Did it come up with anything on it?
Son of former slaves.
Yes.
He is known as the father of Black history for everything that he's done and contributed into ensuring that these stories of African Americans are told, represented, not just in February, throughout the year, but, specifically to this so that they can be highlighted.
Right.
So.
Okay, that was kind of what, I grew up and I knew of Carter G. Woodson and didn't know a lot about it because we didn't have a lot of that information prevalent to grab and look at it now as we do today.
Yeah.
But a lot of times folks don't necessarily understand what it was or what Black Americans contributed to the progress of the United States and some of the inventions that are still seen globally.
Right.
As a kid, I never saw these things in front of me. And then when I saw the history books, they didn't represent Black people, which was kind of just, now you think about it and you kind of think, well, why was that not included? So February was a time that he felt was an opportunity to really be able to highlight some of the contributions that Black Americans contributed.
Yeah, which is great. But so tell me, why did they pick? Why was February picked?
Well, February was started a couple of things that started back in the late 1800s or so. That when this was mandated or looked at, it was because President Lincoln, his birthday was in the month of February,
Okay.
and he was not a black guy,
Right. Yeah.
but
That's true.
he was instrumental in the progression of this country in a sense for what he did.
Yeah.
And some folks who say that, well, it wasn't necessarily because of the slaves or anything like that, but nevertheless, it still made a profound direction for this country.
Yeah.
And then the other person that was said was Frederick Douglass.
Okay.
Now, Frederick Douglass, he chose the month of February as his birthday month, but he was as a slave. He had no knowledge of when or what month it was that he was born, so he was unable to will it.
Birthday. He chose
February.
sometime the date in February.
So that was sort of the context and the reason why Black History Month was designated, and I believe Carter G. Woodson chose February as a means to sort of highlight those contributions in this time.
Okay,
so
that makes sense.
So, anyways, I mean, Carter G. Woodson, from what I understood, is that he wanted to sort of eliminate, or he was hoping that it would help to, by displaying historical events that Black Americans contributed to the landscape here in the U.S., would help to eliminate racism.
Oh.
And so in doing so, he thought historically, if he was to highlight those, that white folks in this country would be able to see and know that those contributions were being overlooked and ignored in the history books by the historians that were writing these books.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of thinking back to when I was growing up, within the history that I learned, right? Like you only hear very, very small snippets of how African Americans contributed to America's history.
So what was your thought? I mean, if you think about that and you think that you only had like tidbits of information and you think about it, you were younger, you did get a chance to see it. It should have been more prevalent in the books when you were younger. And what was your thought? You didn't really...
We didn't really think about it though, right? Because as a young child who's learning, I think for me anyway, you take it as, oh, this is what we were being taught. This is what we know, right? We don't know those specific, more specific details. And if it's not brought up, well, then we don't know it.
Okay.
Right? It's not good or bad. Well, it is bad, right? Like we need to know these things.
Right.
But at the same time, that's the way that, I don't want to know if it's education or history was taught, so that we weren't aware. It wasn't until you actually started, you go into in college, right? Mm-hmm. I think today, Black History Month is more prominent, especially now with the way social media is and, kind of marketing and like there's all these other things that have advanced as well. So that's more at the forefront, but it's not until that it gets really exposed that you look back and you say, well, wow, there were so many different contributions here. Yes, the main ones, right? Civil rights movement was definitely brought up, and we walked through that with Dr. King and all that fun stuff. But, to hear about Frederick Douglass was a very small part of it.
Really?
Right?
Okay.
Like super small part of the history lesson. I didn't know who Carter G. Woodson was.
Okay.
Before we did some research, I had no idea who he was and why he founded or why he's pushing for Black History Month. So, again, it's whatever history wants to be told to our younger generation. Right. That is the problem, right? So because they don't want.
Do you think that as a youngster, and you read about, you had history class, but most of the history that maybe resonated in your head were of men of what? Did you have very much knowledge of men of color that contributed to the inventions? What about, like, for example, George Washington Carver? I mean, it's interesting because we mention him, but a lot of folks probably say, well, kind of. Yeah. But his inventions helped to really move the progress of the United States. He did over 300 some inventions with the peanut, with a simple peanut, from fuel to peanut butter, and there were 300 products that he created from that.
Crazy.
And what was interesting is that we, as a kid, we knew of him because he was kind of written slightly, and it wasn't put a lot of importance on it.
Right.
And I believe that Carter G. Woodson felt like here are prominent folks that basically contributed to the landscape that were not written about, were overlooked. We were talking earlier, and I thought, what about, for example, some of the folks here probably are aware of, there was a movie out that came out to kind of expose these ladies. It was called Hidden Figures.
Yeah. That's
and
what
they were math.
They're geniuses, by the way. It wasn't just like they were human computers.
Never knew about them. Never knew about them, and they were in the history books.
Right.
You think about it. For example, even the Tuskegee Airmen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And everybody heard about them.
You hear about it, right? But you don't understand it. You really. Totally. It's just one of those. There's a paragraph or one section.
What was their contribution? Do you know very much about what their contribution was?
I don't know much about it.
So if you think about it, I mean, the African American pilots or the military, the military back in the day did not necessarily allow black soldiers to even take foot on the battlefield because they felt like they were not capable of doing this. And that kind of went all the way back to the Civil War. And even though there were troops that were back, and there was a movie called Glory that sort of displayed that they were capable of doing battle in the battlefield with the white soldiers that were there. So when you start to look at that, and those pieces of history that were sort of swept away into the books that were never disclosed to the general public, it became more important why February was sort of the highlight of why and I became even more aware that it was very important because a lot of times white America did not necessarily understand. They didn't even know. A lot of the white citizens here were unaware that my forefathers were part of the growing part of the United States and contributed very much to that.
Yeah.
So in that, I mean, February then took on a little bit more dynamic as we got more because people start to really want to know more of this history that was never disclosed to them.
Yep.
And so when you think about the moonshot, and when you talk about these astronauts that basically relied on numbers and calculations, and then when you find out behind that scene that was never really disclosed openly, that it was a black lady who basically wrote these numbers.
Supercomputer.
Totally.
It was a supercomputer.
But we were sort of embedded, and this is what I think Dr. Woodson was trying to emulate in his time, is that together, we could be that great nation.
Yeah.
And so he thought in the history, if he sort of because he was really a history historian.
Not yes, but he was a historian all around.
He thought, well, these histories should be elevated so that everyone had access to the history of what African Americans contributed during this time. Yeah. And so in that, we started to look at all the pieces. I mean, you can look at in time, and when you start to dig, you find out there were inventors. There was a black inventor of the automobile.
Really?
Yes, but it wasn't written about.
No,
and so I could go through a series of things that now is available that you can find online.
Right.
And I think the premise of February being Black History Month was not that it. And I used to think, well, so is it? Has to be capsulated only in the month of February. Why February? Why is it not from February to January?
Yeah.
All the way through.
Yeah.
And so I'll hear, certain people at times will say, well, why don't we just kind of focus on what's on now? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, yes, but we're still playing catch up. In this nation, we have swept so many historic events in the closet that have not come out, that when you start to, you realize, oh, I didn't know. For example, there was a movie recently, I think Tyler Perry did it, of the 800 women that were in the World War II.
Wow, okay.
They were black women. It was a black troop, and they were given the audacious task of 72 million pieces of mail that were not delivered to the servicemen,
Okay.
and was not capable of being. They didn't have the resources.
Okay.
And then when they were thrown into this moment, they were thrown in knowing that they were going to fail on this, and they succeeded.
Got it.
And so again, it was in the history books. It should have been in the history books, but we knew nothing about this.
Yeah.
So that's sort of why February was sort of elevated to that point, I think even more so. And I'm hoping that people will understand that it really shouldn't stop at February.
Yeah,
If
that's
that makes sense?
100% right. Yeah. You're raising the awareness of this, and it needs to be a year long.
Yes.
Not just a year long, but it needs to be.
Well, it should be, constant, but I
constant.
mean, in the context of it, I mean, we highlight February just because, he started that off. Mm-hmm. Now, I know you had said something about some more information on Dr. Woodson.
Yeah, so just about Black History Month in general, I have 1970, Kent State University in Ohio actually celebrated the full month as that. And then 76, Gerald Ford recognized Black History Month.
Okay. So when you recognized, what was that? What was it like? Law or just?
Well, not. I don't know if it's a law or if that.
Okay, but he recognized it.
But he recognized it, and that's how it's been ever since. So every February since 1970, it's been celebrated. But it's and then earlier, right, when you were talking about the 26 or 15, but officially 76 after Ford acknowledged it. And then it's been celebrated since 1976 minimum on the federal level.
Seems like
it's been a long time.
I saw something about
right.
Yeah, I know.
Compared to the history here, it's not that long.
So February, I thought I saw something about that it was in. I thought in 1986 that it was sort of put on the calendar or something.
Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the case of what they did on that.
I'm still sort of. I think that's what it was because it was designated. February was designated.
That was it. Yeah.
As Black History Month in that regard. So
good. We'll check that and make sure.
One of the things too that I thought was a fact about that maybe a lot of folks out there maybe don't know that February again why it was chosen was February 1st. Was actually the president back in 1865, President Lincoln. He signed the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery in the United States. February 1st.
Yeah, that's huge.
So again, February again was that
milestone month.
And then 5 years later, in 1870, 5 years later, it was ratified on February 3rd. 1870. Again, February. Yeah. So again, I think that sort of ties into
that month, the month of February, why it's so historic.
Yes.
And why it was chosen.
I was not aware of all of those pieces there, but I think that was sort of prevalent in the history books. And so I think it kind of leads to the fact of why February was sort of that chosen month for Black History Month.
Yeah.
So, and there's so much history that in the month of February, how do you sort of put all of it in that? So I think you could, every February, I think every year you could have different elements in there and still not be able to disclose all of it.
Yeah, you can't touch everything.
I bet you probably never heard of the Buffalo Soldiers.
No.
Yeah, you never heard of the Buffalo Soldiers.
Tell me about the Buffalo Soldiers.
So in American history, the Wild West, the Buffalo Soldiers were part of the U.S. cavalry that was out in the West Plains. And the Native Americans, they sort of revered them because they felt like they were part of the buffalo, which they held sacred. And they found themselves when they went against the war against the Buffalo Soldiers that these warriors, the Buffalo Soldiers, were tenacious in their event to take on the battle. And they fought on the frontier. And so a lot of times those again were swept away into the back, but there were still troops up to date that were from the U.S. Military that were Buffalo Soldiers.
Wow.
Yes. And so in that, again, you probably didn't know that there were black cowboys.
Yeah. Well, I've heard that one. I've heard.
See, a lot of times the Old West was relegated on white kind of stereotypes
exactly.
of cowboys or the white guys. And you never knew that there were black cowboys that actually did the same thing.
Right.
You
don't think
didn't see
about that. You didn't think
and
about
I
that.
think it was kind of sort of put into the movies.
Yeah, exactly.
And
That's it.
so
That's why.
as white America, they didn't know, they didn't have that idea.
Yeah.
That again, there were blacks on the frontier out there. And so, for example, you probably didn't know that. I'm trying to think of his name now. He was the. I see his face, and they did a series on him just recently. But he was a black sheriff.
Bass Reeves?
Yes, Bass Reeves. Thank you.
I know.
So you know it.
Reeves.
Okay.
Yes.
So I didn't know about him younger, but he was the instrument in which they created the Lone Ranger.
Right.
Off of his character.
Yes. And maybe that's why I can't remember why, but I did. And they've done series on him.
Yes.
A little television series. Recently, yes.
But before, I never knew about him.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
I don't know. I don't know where I heard about Bass. I've heard about him for a while.
Okay.
Because I actually went in
the latter days or when you were growing up?
Oh, no, not when I was growing up.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up, you didn't know. You knew of the Lone Ranger. Everybody knew of the Lone Ranger.
Yes.
And so they never, it was not talked.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are the kinds of things in February that, again, highlight the contributions. I mean, he was a pronounced lawman. And a time when you had so much, I would say, discourse between white and blacks in this country.
Yep.
That here's this lawman that's going out there holding the law, and he brought in over 300 some, I would say, criminals.
Yeah.
And you think, well, wait a minute. Here's this lawman in a time when
in the Wild West.
In the Wild West,
where all you think of is craziness, lawlessness.
Absolutely. And you said he was a lawman.
He was it. He was holding it.
And so a lot of black kids do not have the image of what their forefathers brought to the landscape. So they're not given that. So they don't know that they have that as an inspiration. And little white kids are not aware of that, to be inspired by that as well. So as a kid myself, I was only seeing inspiration of white kids or white people that did things.
Right.
And so I think that sort of limited America's ability to grow. And that's from my perspective. And I think that sort of goes back to what Carter G. Woodson was talking about, that if history was being told equally across the boards, the country itself would grow from that. And the pronunciation of, well, we experience diversity and all that. We start to become more of what this country was founded to be. Because you think about it, it was supposed to be a land of freedom and opportunities for the folks that came from places.
Everybody came from.
Think about liberty. What does the liberty stand for?
What does it stand for?
It's supposed to be, you come here, everyone had an equal opportunity to become part of this.
Yes, part of this nation, and do whatever you like and establish what you want.
Now, if you think about it, you had mentioned earlier too something about what, as a Chinese American, what your perspective was on this.
You think about, immigrants. Immigrants through, right? My parents, my mom, of course, she's an immigrant.
Yes.
My dad born here, but his father's father, right? His grandfather was an immigrant. His mom, immigrant, right? And they have their own experiences.
Yes.
Right. The Chinese people here in America weren't treated as good either, right?
Exactly.
It wasn't slave, but they definitely had to be working on the railroads, indentured servants, right? You think back to just in different Asian cultures as well. You think of the Japanese that were put in internment camps during World War I, or World War II, and just kind of that whole dynamic, right? That you have to face, and that you face as a person that's different, right, than what is considered the norm of white America. And I think it's interesting because, from my perspective, I think that a lot of different cultures here in America, we forget that African Americans are the ones that laid the foundation for a lot of the freedoms that we have today being people of color. I think that's important to recognize and to realize, because we wouldn't have those same things, those same freedoms, if, African Americans wouldn't
really,
have done what they've done. And, right, again, the voices of the Asian community are there, and they were probably, I know there's a few of the, some of the Asian leaders that worked with, the African American communities on the civil rights movement, things like that.
Yes.
But that also wasn't a part of, right, of what we learned either. Is we learned of the civil rights movement. We learned that African Americans pushed for these specific freedoms. And it's not just, I think what I'm trying to get at is for other ethnicities here and other people of color, is that what they did, what the African American society did, what they did for America was not just for them.
Right. It was the progress for America.
For America, and it helped people of all different colors, not just black. It helped brown and yellow and, everybody to push forward. So I think that's
it's a strong statement there. And I think it resonates across the spectrum. And it was not, and Black History Month was not to exclude whites, but to embrace them, to embrace what has been done in this country.
It's history,
yes.
Right? And it's American history,
Absolutely.
Which is all of our history here.
Totally. I mean, and so when you have that, and I think that, and my hope is that this country would embrace the diversity as a strength.
Right.
Because I believe that with all of us, with those kinds of strengths.
You just think of what you're explaining with the hidden numbers, right?
Yes.
People like that. Who else? George Washington Carver with what he did.
Right.
If that's just the smallest sampling of the African Americans, I mean, think of the other diverse cultures that we have in here, the other diverse people of color that we have here. You get the top 1% of everything. I mean, it's amazing. It'll be amazing, right? Like
that was always the hope, and I believe that was some of the things that Dr. King talked about. And of course, when you have someone that is sort of looking at what America could be, then you've got the opposition to those that don't want necessarily it to be that, and that sort of keeps us from being the country that is great.
Yeah.
And I always ask myself the question, what makes America great? What time frame?
Right.
Is it that we were great?
Right.
Because, I mean, if you think about it, if you sweep slavery under the cover because it was an ugly time in American history, it's like not to sweep it away now, but to understand why it happened, and then you can make certain that it doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
Same thing with the Holocaust. Absolutely. I mean, when you got all these things,
you can't deny it. You can't sweep it under. You have to go ahead on and say, "Look, we messed up. It was messed up,
and now we're moving.
Here's how we move forward. Here's how we Here's how we include other people."
I think Black History Month in February is one of those moments in our year that it highlights and brings us to that moment to say, how are we doing? What is it that we're doing to move forward? Out there, and I hope that America realize that together, and embracing all of our diverse backgrounds of folks that have come here and embrace this landscape. I'm hoping that when America realizes, and I was hoping the 21st century would be that place, but we're still working at it.
Still working on
it. That it would actually be, we would then see America being great. Right. Because then you can be great because you've got everyone from around the world that you're working for one purpose, and that's the freedom of the red, white, and blue that the ones that came before us stood for.
Right.
Make sense?
Makes sense to me.
February is a Black History Month. A mouthful. Anyways,
that's good. It's good.
We're gonna head off at the end of this and just say that we always try to end this with just an act of kindness.
Yeah.
And so, I was gonna say that something I did the other day as an act of kindness. Just kind of everybody rushes on the freeway. And again, I see this trucker and he's trying to get over, and I know he wants to get over, and everybody's crowding in or something.
They're like, no one wants a truck in front of them.
Wants, and he's trying to get over, and he's got it, and I can kind of see this. So I slowed down my pace behind him, and I could see the cars coming up behind me fast.
Yeah.
But I didn't allow, and then let him move over in front. And so I thought, and I told my wife, I said, here's my act of kindness today. So I wanted to highlight that.
That's
and
cool.
We encourage all of you out there, if you can do any little thing.
Any little thing. And I'll tell you what, with what you just said, Harold, I work in the logistics field.
Yes.
That means a lot. And always slow down. Just remember, people have to remember about trucks. How does the product get to the stores, and how is it sitting on the shelves? It's by all those trucks on the road.
Good.
Give them space, give them time. Be aware it's really big. They can't see you, so just make sure. But that's awesome to hear. So,
well, we're going to end that here, and we'll like to see you guys the next time on the Lew Perspective.
No, follow us on all of our social. Yes, okay. Come on now. Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, TikTok, and YouTube. That's it.
You got it. That was a mouthful.
No,
anyway, we'll see you next time.
See ya. Okay, bye.